One of the strange things about getting older is realizing how many things we worried about that really didn't matter. Life has a really funny way of teaching us some valuable lessons, often a lot slower than we would like. I know when I was younger and I would learn a lesson the hard way, or I'd try to reach a goal, I always wanted to do it immediately, if not sooner. Growing older, you realize the value of patience and growing wisdom that comes with time. The only way you can earn that is with time. The problem with that sometimes can be that, some of the lessons we learn happen way later than we would have liked. There's a lot of things that I know now that I wish I knew when I was younger. And I'm sure you've heard the old saying, and it's a saying for a reason. It's because we all kind of feel that way, that we wish we had that knowledge back then when it was maybe more valuable. But I think it's behind a lot of us as we grow older. That's where that kind of wisdom comes from. Is we start to take in those lessons that, although we might not be able to install them into our lives as effectively as we did when we were younger, they're still valuable, and they're still valuable that we can pass on to a younger generation as well. So I mean, there's a lot of value in things that we can learn, even if we learn them later, beyond the fact, as we get older. One of the things I've learned is that time is the most valuable thing. It's the most valuable thing that we have. And that's, again, something that maybe I didn't take into account when I was younger, but now I really, really give it a lot of credit. Um, Money in my life, as I'm sure in your life, has come and gone. Um, that's one thing that I guess we'd all like to have more of, but time is something that we can't get back. And as we get older, it gets more and more valuable, and how we spend it and who we spend it with matters. So that's a lesson that I'm learning as I get older, is that time is money, it's currency, and it's something that I hold more valuable than money. Point number two is that most people are too busy worrying about themselves to judge you. And I know that's hard for some people to believe, but that's one of the reasons as you get older, you stop really caring what people think about you, is because they really don't care either way. And a lot of what we deem important, or how people see us, is kind of imagined within ourselves. And so I think as we get older, that's where a lot of people claim that they don't care anymore. But I think it's also half and half. It's half of that, and it's half of realizing that people don't really care. They've got too much going on to really worry about what shirt you're wearing, or how much money you have, or um, so it just becomes more trivial, less important, and something that we can all, you know, live without that feeling that you have to be better than somebody or keeping up with the Joneses. My third point is that health is everything. Um, the energy, mobility, and freedom as we grow older all come from good health. And so prioritizing that has definitely been high on my list of things as I get older. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it when I was younger, as I'm sure a lot of you probably didn't. But as I get older, I'd like to not only live as long as I can, but I want to live as good as I can. And so I've prioritized, eating better and exercising, and um, I'm starting to get the random aches and pains like everybody else, and going to the doctor more. And that's one thing that people have told me I needed to do, is start going to the doctor more often and getting checked up, because you never know, things can creep up, and before you know it, you're dealing with a health crisis. And so I think just paying more attention to that is something that I probably wish that I'd you know learned a little bit better earlier in life. But better late than never. Um, Another point is that relationships matter more than achievements. And what I mean by that is that friends and family always outlast career milestones. Um, I've been up and down in my life. I've had, you know, career surges and I've had dips, and, you know, I've always had a loving family. It's always been there for me. And I think that that's important to keep in mind. And, as we get older, those become even more valuable than they already were. And I think that's a lesson that, possibly could have learned earlier in life. Uh, I know some friends that have climbed the corporate ladder and have, you know, done very well for themselves. And you'd be surprised, or maybe not, how many of those people personally are miserable because they've burned relationships that, we consider sacred or very valuable um, in the process. Now, not everybody. I mean, some people are really adept at managing career and family, and I'm always in awe of people like that that can balance both and do it well. Um, but it seems to me that's the minority, and it seems like the majority either make a choice, career or family, or career, you know, and strong, healthy, cozy relationships. And I think that, I've kind of leaned towards family and relationships all my life, and I definitely learned the value of that as I get older. Number 5 on my little list here is stressing about the future rarely helps. And that's something that I had to learn. I'm sort of a worrier, and worry always comes from, projecting into the future. Bad things are going to happen. And so much we work ourselves into a frenzy about doesn't amount to anything, or it comes out totally different than we imagined it in our heads. So as I get older, I've stopped or tried to reduce worry. I can't say stopped because I still do, but I've tried to reduce the amount that I worry, um, because it's unhealthy. It, you know, drags you down. It makes you think of things that don't even exist. Um, and I found that over time, most things work themselves out. Um, you always have, the good scenario, the bad scenario, and seems like for me anyway, 9 times out of 10, it's always kind of the middle scenario. And that's kind of where things always kind of wind up for me. So I don't know if you feel the same way, but you know, one, it's detrimental health wise to be stressed out and worried a lot. And then the other thing is that most of what you worry about doesn't come to fruition, at least not as horrible as you might think it might. Number 6 on my list is that confidence comes from experience. I've known, you know, people that have been really confident, if not cocky. And I think that when you get older, confidence is more of a experience factor than outwardly expressing confidence, or what some people might consider arrogance. Um, it's more of a knowledge based confidence, I guess, because you've lived experiences as you get older, and so you are confident about it. What somebody that's younger might not understand is that if they're worrying about something or stressing out about something, you've been through it many times, and so they wonder why you're not stressed out about it. Is because you've been there and done that. Um, I've noticed that life slowly removes the need to prove yourself, just being your natural self. I consider myself a very average person, and I'm okay with that. There used to be a time when I was younger, we all strived to be, you know, the big man on campus, or we always wanted to be thought of in high regard, or at least I did when I was younger. And, you know, I found as I get older, that's not really what it's about. And it's It's this quiet confidence that I don't need to prove myself. And, that's obviously another thing that I wish I could have learned a little bit earlier in life, and, maybe might have eliminated some of those mistakes that I've made. Number 7 on my list is simplicity brings peace. And I try to keep things simple. Well, let me backtrack. I usually, in my head, try to complicate everything. That's one of my biggest flaws, but I'm working with that. And I've found that over time, I work myself into a frenzy. Um, Sorry about that. Work myself into a frenzy about things when keeping things very, very simple is the way to go. It unclutters the mind. It's usually the correct way to do things. Um, and it just works out better. I have less to worry about, and that's always a good thing. Number 8, and this is a tough one that we all have to learn over time, I guess, is that failure is often the best teacher. Um, some of the best lessons I've learned, I'm sure you feel the same way, has been through failure. Success usually doesn't teach you as much because you don't have anything really, you don't have that pain point. You succeeded. So it's more likely, in my opinion, that the more success you have, the more you set yourself up for a failure later that maybe it's going to be harder to get over, just because you're used to having a lot of success. Um, and I haven't failed at everything I've done, but I've had plenty of failures and setbacks and you know dips in my life that have taught me things. And I think that's important, is not to be stubborn, like I probably was when I was younger. Not to be stubborn when you fail, but to try to step back from it and learn something. Um, Usually when you put your hand on a stove and it burns, you learn not to do it. And that's kind of the way I approach life now, is that, use those things. If I start into something that I've failed at previously, I either don't do those things, or I learn to maybe do them a different way, or learn from an expert on how to do them because I've failed before. So I consider that an important lesson that I've learned as well. Number 9, and this is something that I really have gotten into lately, is to enjoy ordinary days. Not every day has to be a spectacular red letter day. Some of my most favorite moments lately have been just ordinary, regular days where there's not much going on. You just kind of sink into the day and you kind of enjoy it, and you kind of mellow out and you enjoy the surroundings, even if you're at home. It can be therapeutic. I like to come home in the evenings and watch a good movie. Um, and there's nothing, you know, there's a lot to be said about that. I'm not going out, I'm not doing anything spectacular. Um, Now, sprinkling in some of those things is always nice, but I think that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make, is that while those things are nice, don't just skip over the ordinary days on your way to that next excursion or vacation. Learn to enjoy each day. And as we get older, we have fewer of those days left. So it's important, I think, to enjoy each one that we have. And then the last point I want to make is that life moves faster than you think. I know when I was younger, I thought, when I was in my 20s, for instance, being 57 as I am now was a lifetime. It was generations away, or it felt like it was forever. Um, and now that I'm here, I noticed that that time flew by. Um, from 22 to 57 has really flown by. And I think about that quite often as I get older. The younger days, of course, we miss them, um, but living in the moment, and accepting it, I think, is important. Um, so I'll leave you with this: wisdom often arrives later in life, but when it does, it can often change how you see everything. And I just wanted to share a few things, and just you know see what you thought. I'd invite your comments and see if if you feel kind of the same way about things. And please, if you have any additional things, please add them in the comments below. I'd love to read them, and we'll talk to you soon.